Hello, my friends. Many people are afraid of flying. Personally, I'm afraid of pilots. In this story, you'll see a pilot who did the unthinkable in every way. So it's February 1st, 2008 in the United States near the East Coast. We have a magnificent aircraft. It's an almost new plane. It had flown 799 hours. It's a King Air, a Beechcraft King Air C-90B. B, a magnificent twin-engine turboprop, so an excellent aircraft. And then, unfortunately, it's in the hands of an irresponsible person. So we have a pilot who wants to head to an airport called Mount Airy with 5 of his friends. I didn't check. It's in North Carolina, but I didn't look it up on a map. It's just a small secondary airport, next to which there are large forests. And the purpose actually of this trip is to go hunting. So they're going to take off from Cedar Towns, again, a really small airport, and they have a 50-minute flight ahead of them. So let's quickly talk about the weather that day. So the weather, especially at their destination, it's not great even when they leave, but at the destination, let me tell you. There are clouds accumulating at 300 feet above the ground, so about 100 meters from the ground. There are very dense clouds that completely cover the sky. We have a temperature of 1 degree and a dew point of 0 degrees, so visibility is quite compromised. We also have patches of fog forming. Rain is falling, there is turbulence. And then, since there is visible moisture and we're dealing with temperatures around 0 or below, we also have icing. At some point, ice forms on the plane. So that's the whole package. There was a time when pilots, when they checked the weather, it was to decide on a go or a no-go. Do I go or do I not go? Nowadays, it feels like a lot of pilots check the weather just because they have to. So they download it, print it, or put it on a tablet. All right, weather checked and off we go. So they're going to take off. There are 6 of them, as I mentioned, in this aircraft. They enter the clouds and, so to speak, they'll never come out of them. Sorry to spoil it for you, but if we're here, it's because this story is going to end badly. As I was saying, they're flying. Next to him in the right seat, there's not really a co-pilot, but a passenger who has some private pilot experience. So he's there to talk with him, to give him advice and all that. And the 2 men are therefore handling this aircraft. They're starting their descent. There's an RNAV GPS approach. There is no equipment at the airport to guide them, so it will be done using GPS. And they're starting the descent. Since there's no visibility, they're on an instrument approach. They have to break out below the clouds, but be careful, there's a limit. You can't keep going through the clouds all the way to the runway. This isn't Category 3 ILS or anything like that. These aren't those automatic landings where you see the 747 appear. You hear it more than you see it just a second before it touches down. We're not there. We're on an approach that basically lets you be in the vicinity of the runway. From then on, you must see it to land. So there's a minimum altitude that we're allowed to descend to on these approaches. So here, what we call an MDA, it's 1,680 meters over 80 feet at this airport. And so if we reach this altitude and we don't see the runway, we are allowed to continue up to a specific point indicated on the chart, which can be located anywhere. Sometimes it can be at the beginning of the runway or even on the other side of it. That's the point. It's not a point that guarantees we can land, but it's a point where if we get there and we don't see the runway, we have to go around. All right, so they are descending. And during the descent, the pilot will make remarks that the NTSB, with its usual restraint, will describe as unprofessional. So what were these unprofessional remarks that were made? Actually, here's what he did during the descent. Since he saw that his passengers were scared, he started to frighten them, teasing them by singing a song about it. Yes, I'm going to crash, I'm going to crash. A song about someone coming down for the last time. That's what he did first. Afterwards, it seems that he played with the engine speed to intensify the sensations for the passengers and make them even more uncomfortable. And the last one, which is absolutely incredible, which is quite unique, unique in the annals, is that he told the passengers as a joke, listen, we're going to crash or we might crash. If you're a believer, get on your knees. Now is the time to pray. That's the kind of unprofessional remarks he made. The other terrible thing he said, how do we know that? Because that plane, since it's very modern, even if it's not legally required to have a CVR, a cockpit voice recorder, well, it had one because since it's operated under Part 91, it's not mandatory to have black boxes except that it had them. So we know a bit more about this story. And so what he's doing is he's descending. He's just approaching the MDA of 1,680 feet. The passenger to his right, who's a private pilot, tells him, yeah, you're getting close to the MDA. The guy replies rather coldly, oh, don't worry, I'm going to go below, I'm going to bust through it, determined to bust through it. But in addition to the catastrophe that happened just on this channel, there are a lot of cases. I remember there's one that comes to mind now. I think it was near Zurich. We had the company, the Swiss company, right, that had some crocheurs. And then he ends up in the forest with a lot of damage, a lot of deaths and all that, precisely because of this situation of continuing to descend when you can't see the runway. Because at that point, it's Russian roulette. If you descend without visibility, you pray hoping that at some point the clouds will clear and you'll see the runway. But it may happen that once the clouds clear, you see trees or you see a rock face. Unfortunately, that's the risk. So he decides to continue below the MDA, determined. The pilot to his right says nothing, which seems normal. Another thing we realize, and that's going to be the final nail in the coffin. We realize during communications, during exchanges with the other pilot, that he is out of his depth in this aircraft. He doesn't have it under control. So he's new to this aircraft. That's understandable. But when you're new to a plane, you don't take off with passengers and you don't take off in weather like this. You take off with an instructor, learn, explore, read, and educate yourself. He's completely overwhelmed by the aircraft's systems. When he talks, it's all, how do I adjust this thing? How do I do that thing? That's how he talks about the aircraft's systems. He doesn't know them at all, clearly not, given how this is going to end. Even when it comes to basic aircraft handling or piloting, if you will, well, he's not very good. He doesn't have control of the aircraft. So what happens is that he comes out of the clouds, keeps going, keeps going, keeps going. And then suddenly when the runway appears, they're too close. That means they can't land on that runway. So what he decides to do is to perform a maneuver that's quite dangerous, called the circle to land. It's so dangerous that it's officially allowed, but with very specific standards and rules. Not the way he did it, recklessly, but even when you do it, let's say by the book, it still has its risks, to the point that quite a few airlines completely forbid it. So what's the idea? It's what's called a circle to land. That means breaking through the cloud layer using instruments like he just did in a completely reckless way. After that, we'll circle around the runway, so we'll fly parallel to the runway and then land on the other side. At that point, we're no longer on instruments and must maintain visual contact with the runway, so we make a visual approach. So you see, it's a visual approach, a visual landing that we do after an instrument approach. In the end, the approach is done visually. You see, it's a bit of an unhealthy mix of styles, and it has cost quite a few lives. So what does he do? He's going to head to the right, start flying parallel to the runway to go around it and come back to land. Well, while he's doing that, he enters a fog bank and clouds, and then he loses visibility. So he loses sight of the runway. So what is he going to do? He's going to decide to do a go around, except that he pulls back on the yoke, and in the panic, well, he forgets it. He forgets to push the throttles forward and instead pulls back on the yoke. And what happens is that the plane pitches up. He loses airspeed quite quickly. The stall warning starts to sound and the plane will suddenly nose down and fall. So it falls. What people see is that they suddenly see a plane coming out of the clouds. It's in a 45-degree dive. And then it's going to crash in front of a house. And then There you go, an extremely, extremely violent impact. The police arrive, the firefighters, all the equipment. We're going to find the 6 people, the 6 occupants inside. They're all dead, all deceased. And then no one was wearing a seatbelt. In any case, the report mentions the passengers who weren't wearing seatbelts at all. That means they weren't briefed or anything. So despite this turbulent approach and all that, they were completely unrestrained. The report doesn't specifically say whether wearing a seatbelt would have changed anything for them. I don't think it would have made a difference. With such a violent impact, the seatbelt wouldn't have changed anything. The investigation will reveal later, after an autopsy, that the pilot was taking medication. They found quite a lot of medication in his blood. And he has a history. He has a history of depression. He has a history of a compulsive disorder. He had a compulsive disorder, which he had hidden from the FAA when he applied for his pilot's license. They also found that he had problems with social adjustment. You can understand it when you look at the attitude he had throughout this whole approach, both his personal behavior and his professional conduct. That's what I was telling you at the beginning of the video. People are afraid of flying. But if you look, most planes, up to 1 nanosecond before impact, are in perfect working order. Very often it's human error that we see. And here these poor people found themselves in the fog in a terrible situation. To realize that the pilot was mentally unstable, that the pilot was doing all kinds of crazy things, all while shouting that we're going to crash and asking them to pray for their lives. Thank you, my friends, for watching this video. Thank you to those who subscribe on YouTube. Just like that, click to subscribe. It encourages me to make more videos. I'm one of the few channels that doesn't talk about subscribing all the time, and sometimes the counter just stops completely. I don't think about it, and that's normal. I understand. My book is available on Amazon, my latest book about the Titan, where people are trapped, with Stockton. Roche, who isn't crazy to his credit, he won't pray or anything, but he's a man with his own dark side. You'll see in the book, there's a genius side to him, there's a visionary side, but there's also a human side, a man cornered, alone, under pressure. And he tipped over, he went to the dark side, and it ended with a massive crash not far from the Titanic. The book is on Amazon, and in the paid section of YouTube and Patreon, you have today more than 20 videos waiting for you, exclusive ones that will never be public. Thank you for watching this video this far, and I'll see you in the next one.